What if one of the most powerful military strategies of the Second World War was never truly what its architects believed it to be? What if the bombing campaigns meant to cripple an enemy economy were built on assumptions that turned out to be dangerously optimistic? And what if the true turning point of the air war in Europe was not technology alone, but intelligence hidden in plain sight? By the early years of World War II, the United States Army Air Forces were firmly committed to a doctrine of precision strategic bombing. American planners believed that modern industrial economies were fragile systems. If key nodes were destroyed, aircraft factories, ball-bearing plants, fuel production facilities, the entire war machine would collapse under its own weight. On paper, the theory was elegant. In practice, it proved far more complex. Early bombing campaigns against Germany revealed the limits of this thinking. While American bombers did succeed in inflicting serious damage on German aircraft factories, the industry itself was never destroyed. Production slowed, facilities were damaged, but the German economy adapted. Factories dispersed, production lines were repaired, output recovered with surprising speed. The same pattern emerged with attacks on ball-bearing plants. These facilities were considered a critical bottleneck in German industrial production. The logic was simple. Without ball bearings, machinery would grind to a halt. Yet despite heavy damage, especially at Schweinfurt, the results fell short of expectations. The Germans faced difficulties, yes, but they were not paralyzed. Meanwhile, the cost to the attackers was staggering. The 8th Air Force suffered brutal losses during the August and October raids. Bombers were shot down in large numbers, crews were lost, and morale was strained. Even when intelligence suggested that German production would soon recover, the losses were so severe that repeating these missions became untenable. The theory of precision bombing had collided with the reality of modern industrial warfare. Everything began to change in 1944. By that year, the capabilities of the 8th Air Force had evolved dramatically. The most important development was the arrival of long-range fighter escorts. With fighters capable of accompanying bombers deep into enemy territory, the 8th Air Force could finally conduct sustained penetration raids without catastrophic losses. Target selection also changed. In the late winter and early spring of 1944, American strategic bombing focused first on the German aircraft industry, and then on preparing the battlefield for the coming invasion of Western Europe. The air war was no longer just about destruction. It was about shaping the conditions for Operation Overlord. In May 1944, a crucial strategic decision was made. Lieutenant General Carl Spaatz, Commander-in-Chief of U.S. Strategic Air Forces in Europe, argued that Allied bomber strength had reached a point where it could support both the invasion and a new, decisive offensive against Germany's oil industry. Spaatz persuaded Allied Supreme Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower that this was the moment to strike. This time, the target truly was Germany's most vulnerable economic point. Oil was the lifeblood of modern warfare. Without fuel, tanks could not move, aircraft could not fly, and armies could not maneuver. Attacks on Germany's oil facilities had an immediate and devastating impact. The Wehrmacht's mobility suffered almost at once. Even more critically, fuel shortages prevented Germany from training a new generation of pilots to replace those lost in the brutal air battles of the spring of 1944. On May 12, 1944, the offensive began in full force. A staggering 935 B-24 Liberators attacked synthetic oil plants across Germany. The impact was swift, and the confirmation came almost immediately, not from reconnaissance photographs but from intelligence. Through ultra-decrypts, Allied commanders learned that these strikes had shaken Germany's strategic position. On May 16, Bletchley Park forwarded an intercepted German message canceling a general staff order that would have transferred flak batteries from Luftflotten 1 and 6 to Luftflotte 3 in France. Instead, those air defenses were redirected to protect the hydrogenation plant at Troglitz, one of Germany's most critical synthetic fuel facilities. More flak units followed. Heavy batteries were pulled from Ostersleben, Wiener Neustadt, and Leipzig-Erla, locations that had been defending aircraft factories, and sent to shield other oil plants. This massive reallocation of air defense resources spoke volumes. The Germans were deeply worried. Ultra-decrypts continued to confirm the scale of the crisis. On May 21, Another intercepted message warned that consumption of mineral oil in all forms would have to be drastically reduced. Allied attacks in Romania and on German hydrogenation plants had caused extensive failures in fuel production. A significant reduction in fuel allocations for June was expected. The Allies did not relent. On May 28 and 29, the 8th Air Force launched renewed attacks on the oil industry. At the same time, the Italy-based 15th Air Force struck Ploesti, one of Germany's most important sources of petroleum. Together, these operations cut German fuel production by approximately 50%. By June 6, the situation had grown desperate. Bletchley Park passed along another decrypted message from the German Air Force High Command. It stated bluntly that renewed Allied interference with aircraft fuel production meant that even the most essential requirements for training and operations could scarcely be met. Fuel allocations were restricted to bombers, fighters, ground attack units, and a handful of senior supply officials. To maintain the defense of the Reich and prevent the collapse of the German Air Force in the East, commanders had been forced to tap into emergency reserves. Throughout the summer of 1944, German engineers and construction crews worked frantically to repair damaged oil facilities. Every success was short-lived. Allied bombers returned again and again, systematically undoing the repairs. By the end of the year, Germany never achieved a lasting recovery in synthetic fuel production. Ultra played a decisive role in this sustained focus. It allowed Allied commanders to see not only the damage they were inflicting, but also the progress of German reconstruction efforts. Albert Speer, Germany's Minister of Armaments and Munitions, understood the gravity of the situation immediately. After the first attacks in May, he warned Adolf Hitler that the enemy had struck one of Germany's weakest points. If the attacks continued, Speer said, Germany would soon have no fuel production worth mentioning. His only hope, Speer added bitterly, was that the Allied Air Force General Staff would be as scatterbrained as Germany's own. That hope was not fulfilled. Ultra ensured that Allied commanders knew exactly how effective their bombing campaign was. Intercepts revealed that fuel shortages were widespread, not localized. This convinced Allied leadership that they had uncovered a fundamental weakness in the German economy, and they exploited it relentlessly. At the tactical level, Ultra proved just as valuable during the execution of northern France. A mid-May assessment signed by Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt warned that Allied attacks were systematically destroying rail infrastructure, already hampering supply and troop movements. Ultra intelligence allowed Allied tactical air commanders to measure the effectiveness of their strikes against bridges and rail lines. German motorized and mechanized units struggled to move forward, even under cover of darkness. The invasion battlefield was being shaped long before Allied troops set foot on the beaches. Ultra also revealed the location and strength of German fighter units, as well as the success of Allied attacks on airfields. Intercepts showed when damaged bases had been repaired or abandoned altogether. Armed with this knowledge, the Allies conducted a carefully coordinated campaign that devastated German air bases near the English Channel. Forced to abandon forward bases, the Germans relocated their aircraft to airfields far to the southeast. This disrupted plans to reinforce Luftflotte 3 in response to the invasion. When reinforcements finally arrived from the Reich, they were forced into poorly prepared bases. Ultra intercepts tracked much of this movement, identifying arrival times and locations. One of Ultra's most dramatic contributions came on June 9th and 10th. Intercepts revealed the exact location of General Leo Gare von Schweppenberg's Panzer Group West headquarters. The Germans obligingly left vehicles and radio equipment in the open. The resulting air attack destroyed most of the headquarters' communications equipment and killed 17 officers, including the Chief of Staff. The strike effectively eliminated the only German headquarters in the West capable of coordinating large-scale mobile operations. Yet one question remains. How were the British able to break German codes so consistently and with such devastating effect? Ironically, the Germans themselves never seriously considered the answer. Although they suspected that the Allies possessed highly accurate intelligence, they looked everywhere except their own encrypted communications. Their faith in the Enigma machine bordered on obsession. After the sinking of the battleship Bismarck in May 1941, the German Navy launched an inquiry. Led by a signals officer with a vested interest in the outcome, the investigation concluded that Enigma could not possibly have been compromised. Instead, the disaster was blamed on British intelligence trickery. Similar suspicions arose in 1943, when Allied anti-submarine warfare became increasingly effective. Even then, German cryptographic authorities insisted that their ciphers were absolutely secure. Decryption, they claimed, would require so much effort and time as to be useless. They were wrong. Worse still, the Germans compounded their mistakes through poor security discipline. They reused key sheets instead of generating new ones. They transmitted stereotyped messages at predictable times. The Luftwaffe, in particular, provided a steady stream of cribs, known phrases that allowed British cryptanalysts to reconstruct Enigma settings. Even the German Navy fell into these traps. Admiral Donitz's tight control of the U-boat war generated enormous radio traffic, which itself aided cryptanalysis. When a fourth rotor was added to Enigma in 1943, it briefly threatened a blackout, but technical limitations and overlap with older systems allowed Bletchley Park to break back in within 10 days. Perhaps the most telling incident occurred during the Bismarck chase. After the battleship slipped away from British cruisers, the Admiralty confirmed its course not through naval intelligence, but through a Luftwaffe intercept casually reporting that Bismarck was heading for Brest. The lesson is unmistakable. The Germans were tactically and operationally brilliant in many respects, but in intelligence, communications, and logistics they were dangerously careless. Above all, they underestimated their enemies. World War II demonstrates that no matter how advanced a nation's technology may be, arrogance and complacency can prove fatal. To underestimate the intelligence and capabilities of one's adversaries is to invite disaster. And in the skies over Europe, that lesson was written in fire, fuel, and silence.